My realization was this company is going to be inordinately hard to build. Most companies are. Rainmaker maybe even uniquely so, because like the market doesn't exist. Who are you going to sell rain to, you crazy person? Like, you got to build your own drones. It's all ridiculous. If you can trick yourself into loving the sensation of failing such that you like are excited to get back up and attack the problem, you're going to create like a culture of really unparalleled work ethic and resilience.
I'm Sammi Cohen, and this is Social Currency, a podcast that unpacks the stories that are shaping business, culture, and the intersection of the two. How would the world's food and health be impacted if we could control the weather? My guest today, Augustus Doricko, founder and CEO of Rainmaker, is on a mission to find out. What you're about to hear is one of the wildest conversations I've had with an entrepreneur on or off the mic. Augustus' company, Rainmaker, does exactly this. They make rain for farms, watersheds, and ecosystems. Since we sat down for this conversation, he announced a $25 million raise to support his mission of making the world habitable. He's one of the faces of the hard tech renaissance in El Segundo, California, but not the usual face of a tech founder. He's just barely in his mid-20s, and if you're watching the video of this conversation on Spotify or YouTube, you'll see that he has a very impressive mullet. And in this conversation, we talk about the unique challenges of engineering cutting-edge technology, the impact of being a Peter Thiel Fellow, and why his company motto is, "We love the taste of blood in our mouth." This is Augustus Doricko's Social Currency. Augustus, welcome to Social Currency.
Thanks so much for having me, Sammi.
To kick things off, you started Rainmaker with a pretty lofty goal. So tell us about this goal.
Yeah, our goal is to make Earth habitable. I think most people think about weather and ecosystems in terms of like the rules of the game. We understand that the weather just happens in like liability contracts and insurance contracts. We talk about acts of God and how the weather just happens to us, right? And we don't realize that weather, severe weather like drought or hail or hurricanes, and ecosystems that are useless like deserts that are totally unproductive, we don't realize that we can actually change those. And so Rainmaker's mission is to make Earth more habitable rather than think about other planets. It's to focus here to make Earth as lush and symbiotically abundant for mankind and also the environment.
In more concrete terms, how is Rainmaker doing this?
With technology called precipitation enhancement. Many people might know it by cloud seeding. This tech has existed for 80 years in its most crude form. It was invented in the United States. And the way that I'll first describe what it's like and then talk about the context of it. Certain clouds are not naturally precipitating, or they're not precipitating as much of the water within them as they could. And so what you can do, in principle, what people have done in the past is they'll look at a cloud, they'll say, looks good, fly a plane up into it, spray a mineral, typically called silver iodide, and its crystalline structure is similar to ice. So water will favorably freeze onto that, grow into big, heavy snowflakes, and then those become heavy enough to fall, and if it's cold beneath the cloud, they'll stay as snow, or if it's warm beneath the cloud, those will turn into rain. That tech, in its most rudimentary form, like I said, has existed in the United States since the 1940s. And when you think about old, cool technology, we talk about the 60s a lot. Peter Thiel talks about, like, where's my flying car? Rocketry, fission, and weather modification, I think all had like the most promise of any technology we could imagine, maybe AI now, but really in the 40s, it was those three. And rocketry promised to get us to the stars and other planets. And now we have Falcon 9 launching and we can see it landing all the time. We have starships starting to land. Like, we're going to get to Mars. Rocketry's promise is being fulfilled right now. Fission, it was overregulated, but the promise was to get us free, cheap, abundant energy. We're just about to start seeing that with small modular reactors coming online. Weather modification was supposed to terraform the planet. It was supposed to end droughts. It was supposed to mitigate severe weather, but you never hear about it, right? Or if you do hear about it, it's because of like tinfoil hat, conspiracy theory stuff. And it's a darn shame that you don't see it. What happened was nobody was ever able to prove that weather modification was working, right? If I fly a plane up into a cloud and sprinkle some fairy dust and then it rains, that doesn't mean that I caused it to rain. And so even though it showed so much promise, even though the physics made sense in the 40s, 50s, 60s, people stopped paying for it because they didn't know how it worked. What Rainmaker has done, based on a lot of research from some of America's best scientists and some great scientists in Switzerland, is we've pioneered a new attribution method. so that we can prove how much of the precipitation is anthropogenic, man-made, and differentiate between man-made and natural precipitation. And what we do is we use radar, LiDAR, and satellite imagery. I can get into the details of it later, but we use those different remote sensors to prove how much of the precipitation is man-made. And because we can now do that, we can transparently tell our customers, be they private sector farmers or ecosystem restoration projects with the government, how much water we're making for them.
And speaking about your customers, so this is a pretty advanced technology. Who were your initial customers and who are your potential customers 5 years from now?
Yeah, totally. So the people I thought we would sell to first were farms. My last company sold to farms. Farms need water. I knew that. I knew some farmers, thought we'd sell to them. But when we went out to sell to farms, we realized two things. One, there aren't that many farms that are like 100,000 acres or more, and we can't be more precise than that. So like if you want to, say, punish somebody that you don't like and make it rain on their wedding, we can't be that precise, right? Yeah. But we can do hundreds of thousands of acres. So there's not that many farms that we could service. Of those farms that were big enough, a lot of them don't have high enough margin products to invest in new cool stuff like this. So how do you get farms more water if the farmers aren't paying for it directly? Well, the same way that farms get water now, they pay into either municipal, state, or federal water programs, infrastructure programs with the government. And so what Rainmaker does now is we sell water, we sell precipitation enhancement services to, like I said, municipal, state, and in other countries, national level programs for the sake of filling up reservoirs that go to farms and ecosystems. Long term, I think that data centers consume so much water. So for example, in northeastern Oregon, data centers consume like a quarter of all the water there. Really, wow. in the eastern half of Oregon, they consume about a quarter of the water. If you want to operate one of these data centers sustainably, you need to produce more water. But if you're in eastern Oregon, if you're in Colorado, if you're in Arizona, you can't do desalination. There's nowhere to get more water except from the clouds right above you that aren't precipitating. And so data centers long term, I think, are going to be very, very water intensive. And I think that Rainmaker will serve them well. Eventually, I think that we'll diverge not just from precipitation enhancement, or we won't just do precipitation enhancement, but we'll also get into other forms of weather modification. Hail suppression, for example. Hail does billions of dollars of damage every year. The mechanism by which you can reduce hail is instead of making the ice crystals bigger, you just put a lot more material, and so you can make the ice crystals smaller, reduce the hail severity, eventually reduce also severe weather that causes flooding, for example, with a similar mechanism. And that gets into insurance. Really, it'll be governments, data centers, and insurance, I think, that we serve.
And when we're talking about this technology, how is it physically going up into these clouds? Is it drones? Is it some other cool device?
So the delivery mechanism is drones. In a certain sense, that just seems like a layup over airplanes, right? And you can say, okay, it's way more cost effective per flight hour, right? People can always talk about that when it comes to drones. It's more precise because planes, they're moving at hundreds of miles an hour. Maybe there's only like a 300 cubic meter parcel of the cloud that is seedable. And if you're in a plane going 200 miles an hour, you blast right through that. You can't stay in it. But with drones, you can do that. You also mitigate risk to pilots if you're using drones. Most pilots won't even fly into the clouds that we're seeding because they're full of liquid water that's cold enough to be frozen, which means you'll ice up and fall out of the sky. So what Rainmaker had to do was not just build any drone, but it was build a drone with anti-icing capabilities and extremely high wind resistance to withstand the severe winter weather events that we're flying into. And so kudos to the engineers and the scientists that participated in that, because we have the only mid-sized drone in the United States that can survive severe anti-icing and one of very few in the planet, or at the very least within NATO. It's one of two within NATO that can withstand severe anti-icing.
So a few things I want to dive into here. Obviously, you just mentioned the products and the technology that your company is building are at the forefront of what has been built before. Mm-hmm. And so I almost want to take a few steps back to understand how someone like yourself even got into this whole industry and specifically this cloud seeding space.
Yeah, it wasn't intentional. I really stumbled into, it's one of those things where you like wake up 2 years later and look around and you're like, how did I get here? So I started off as a physics undergraduate student at UC Berkeley. And that was a great time. I love Berkeley. I probably enjoyed the college experience more than I ought to have for periods. But I was studying physics there. The pandemic hit during my sophomore year. I moved from Berkeley to Texas to DFW. And while I was in DFW, I was doing school online, which was mostly a joke. And then I was a data scientist full time just for the sake of doing something productive and making money. But I don't know if you saw this online at any point before, but I was a personal trainer.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, okay. So I was a personal trainer just because I really love to lift, and I wanted to meet people. And I met the biggest water well driller in Texas, Jason Flint. Awesome man. He told me all about water well drilling. Eventually brought me under his wing to co-found a business doing automated regulatory compliance for groundwater, which is like, compared to modifying the weather, maybe a little bit different, less exciting, but we were like TurboTax for groundwater. So we handled all your regulatory compliance if you're like a farmer. Built that company up, scaled it, sold my interest in the company in the beginning of 2023. And I realized that, I'd been working in water. Water scarcity was this huge issue, right? Like, for example, Phoenix, Arizona is banning new housing development. They're banning new housing development because they don't have enough water, that is. The California Department of Water Resources explicitly plans for 500,000 acres of farmland to turn into desert by 2030 because there's not enough water. And like, if they're planning for that, it's actually going to be worse, right? St. George, Utah is banning new housing development. Las Vegas is having huge issues with development. And so the Colorado River Delta, you're seeing ecosystem collapse because of water scarcity. It's a little bit better now, but there's all of these areas where just in the United States, let alone in the more water-stressed regions of the world like the Middle East, people are suffering, ecosystems are suffering because there's not enough water. And so what I wanted to do was produce more water. First idea was desalination.
Can you actually describe desalination for anyone who's listening who isn't
100%.
familiar?
So where is there lots of water? Well, there's lots of water in the oceans, right? But the problem is it's salty. So you can't drink it, you can't irrigate with it, you can't take a shower with it. But if you have either a membrane, so basically a filter that you push the salt water through, you can push the water through, but the salt gets captured. And then so you end up with fresh water on the other side. But that only works if you're on the coast where the ocean is. So if you're in Arizona, if you're even in the interior of California, certainly Colorado, non-starter. Can't use desalination. So axed that one. Looked into a few other technologies. Wasn't a lot out there. And then just through like literally internet deep dives, I wish that the story was cooler and I like met some scientist at a bar or something. But just through those deep dives, I found out about weather modification. And I was like, that seems pretty cool. That seems crazy. And then I read more about it. Have you ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger curve?
No.
Okay, so it's basically this curve that describes like how confident someone is about something based on how much they know about it. And so you're about like 50% when you don't know anything. When you know like 10%, it peaks up and you feel super confident. Then when you know like 30%, you're like, wow, I'm an idiot and I don't know anything about this. And then it gradually gets a little bit better. So I didn't know anything. I found out about it. I was like, this is incredible. We should do it all the time. Then I found out about the attribution problem and I was like, oh, it doesn't work. I can't do this. Then, this is the last how I got here point. I went to the Weather Modification Association conference, which is
exciting.
Real. Maybe somebody would think it's like the place where the Illuminati gets together to decide how the weather gets engineered. It's not. It's like a dozen scientists at like state universities, and then me and like some old guys that have been doing this for a while.
Were people looking at you like, what is this young guy doing here?
Dude, I was in a Yay Kid Cudi collab sweatshirt with a mullet, and they're like, "Who are you?
Who is this guy?"
Yeah, and they were super polite, but I stuck out like a sore thumb. And it was at like a small hotel in Aurora, Colorado. So like, why I was there, who knows? Why they were there, I don't even know. But that's when I found out about what was called the Snowy Project. The Snowy Project is where some scientists realized if you have the right kind of radar and you fly in like a zigzag pattern or a spiral, like a polka dot pattern, if the precipitation enhancement is working, then you should be able to see precipitation just in your flight track. And then you can differentiate between, okay, there's some natural precipitation over here, but we see in the zigzag or in the polka dots where our drone was more precipitation. That's just from us. When I found out about that, I was like, all right, done deal. I'm in, decided to start the company, and then did the fundraising, team building, product building stuff.
I want to actually go back to the building front for Rainmaker. It sounds like you were tackling a ton of very difficult problems all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you even start to prioritize which problems you should tackle and how you're going to tackle them?
I'll say, with respect to the start of the company, there's some better expression as to how to say this, but you ever heard like, if you're not looking back at yourself from a year ago and saying like, oh, I was an idiot, then you're not learning enough.
Yes.
Right. Well, so we're about 2 years deep, which means I've had at least 2 cycles of like, wow, I was an idiot. So when I started the company, I thought the things that Rainmaker was going to do was it was going to use radar from the National Weather Service to measure the cloud conditions that we needed to get attribution. We were going to buy drones from other companies and operate those. And then we were going to use conventional materials like silver iodide in our operations. What I learned was the National Weather Service doesn't cover most of the United States, their radar, that is. And so we actually would end up having to build our own radar. We found out that most drones couldn't withstand the icing conditions that we were dealing with. So we actually had to build our own drones. Silver iodide, although it works, it only works in specific temperatures. And if you want to expand the market, then you need a better material. So we have to engineer our own particles. And then lastly, what I didn't realize was like weather modeling is actually very important for forecasting. And so we have to build our own weather models. So we went from like, I'm just going to use some open source data and somebody else's drone to like in-housing and vertically integrating all of this stuff. We're building our own radar now. We're building our own drones. We're engineering our own particles. We're designing our own weather models. That's pretty nuts. The most important things I would say are 1, the attribution, just like proving to our customers that it's working. And then 2, the drones to get the material up into the clouds. Those, I would say, in that order, are the things that we prioritize on a quarterly basis. Like that's really number 1 and number 2. On the day-to-day basis, how to operate, I mean, good question. And I think that I'm actively learning a lot about it. But, so Jensen Huang, he's the CEO of NVIDIA and founder of NVIDIA, right? He says, he has no real schedule and he just kind of floats from place to place, tries to communicate with everybody in his company. We're almost 50 people now. Just try to... I think the most useful thing is trying to float from place to place, get into the weeds for half a day on one of our engineering problems or one of our government affairs problems or one of our science problems. If they feel like they got it on lock, that engineer or scientist or GA person, then I can pull back. And otherwise, I think the CEO's job is to like tactically parachute in, act as one of the engineer, scientists, or GA people until whatever hair on fire problem is solved at the company, and then go identify the next fire and then just parachute in because you're surveying the full environment all of the time, which is not like a great systemized means for doing this. But I think it's one that is fitting for a company of our size that's not too bureaucratic, that still lets me be close to the metal.
Speaking of Jensen, I was reading a Wall Street Journal article that spoke about his specific work style. And there's one practice that he uses, and I'm curious if you've heard of it or if this is something that you do at Rainmaker. And I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but I think the idea will be the same in that it is a requirement of most people at the company, or it's highly encouraged for people to send in, I believe it's 3, but it may go up to 5 things that they are working on or challenges that they are trying to overcome. And he asks that it gets sent straight to him. So he spends a very large amount of his time actually just going through. Obviously, there are thousands of people at his company, but going through and seeing the hard problems and just the things that people are working on at all stages. Obviously, at 50 employees, it's a very different scale. But I'm curious if you have any of that type of practice, just to make sure you're kind of checking in on what everyone is doing.
Yeah. Elon's "What did you get done this week" at Twitter?
Yes.
We do that. We do that.
Actually.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Just as an accountability mechanism and also so that I can see what's going on. I think it's always tough when you're like a hard tech founder talking about Elon, because you have to tread the line between like, obviously you have to respect the king. On the other hand, you don't want to like be a goofball fanboy, because a lot of people are. But I think that mechanism works really well for keeping people accountable. And also, early on when I started Rainmaker, one of my best friends who became a software engineer at Rainmaker, shout out Darian, he told me that while he was working at Stripe, he had a manager at one point, sort of like an MBA guy, not a real engineer. And his team told this manager that they had an engineering problem. And the manager was just like, oh no, what do we do? And like had no solutions available to give because one, he wasn't technically competent enough. And two, he was not apprised of the day-to-day problems that they were encountering, or at least the week-to-week stuff, because he was much lighter touch. And I by no means am like as capable a scientist as some of our best aerosol scientists or as our best electrical engineers when it comes to radar or our best mechanical engineers. But that story that he told me really like kicked my ass into gear because I was like, I never want to, or at least as little as possible, do I want to be the kind of CEO that like throws my hands up and panics when there's a problem and then like begs my employees to solve it. I think that you should try to burden yourself with as much as possible if you're leading a group of great people. And it's funny too. I think a lot of companies say this. Rainmaker is really different in that it's not in service of money. It's not even necessarily in service of like the mission to make Earth habitable and terraform the planet. That's like the utmost goal. It's like everybody that we've assembled deeply, deeply desires greatness and excellence within themselves, within their peers, within society writ large. And so the standard to which we are held by one another is quite high.
Yeah. So switching gears, I want to talk about the home base, the Gundo.
Yeah.
El Segundo, California, for whoever isn't familiar with the Gundo. So last year, Vanity Fair wrote a pretty amazing article, and I have to read the exact title because it's very memorable. Inside California's freedom-loving, Bible-thumping hub of hard tech. And they were talking about the Gundo. So I want to ask you, because you were a key character in this article, how did El Segundo become this hub of hard tech to begin with?
Yeah, it's a magical place. And it's funny, we joke around there like, is this community? Did Gen Z like rediscover and reinvent community? Because everybody does know each other and like there's families that are friends that hang out and it's relatively young, but kids of engineers will hang out with other kids of engineers. And, sometimes we'll go to church together. We'll go to the bars together. We'll eat lunch together. It's a really magnificent place, all the while doing like futuristic sci-fi level engineering. But how did it start? So there's a long history that made the preconditions for what became Gundo. It started off with the El Segundo refinery. So Standard Oil, Rockefeller, gotta love him, very cool guy, very inspiring guy. He built the second oil refinery in California in El Segundo. So plop that down. It's like half the landmass of the city. So aesthetically, it just inspires like greatness and scale, I think, that being there. Like my apartment, actually, its only windows look at the refinery.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a real mindset thing. I've brought some people back and they're like, isn't that awful? And I'm like, no, you wouldn't get it. So that there resulted in this pool of technicians and chemical engineers and mechanical engineers being available to support the refinery. Then for the sake of servicing the refinery, some CNC shops, so like a way to cut metal for parts, those popped up around, some other metal part making stuff. So that set up the initial infrastructure like 100 years ago. Then the big defense primes, so like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, they all kind of plopped down in Southern California. They had huge facilities. They brought and built more warehouses, more engineering talent. Then I would say the next real big thing, and that was in the 60s, the next real big milestone for El Segundo, well, I guess it was the space shuttle program. We built a ton more warehouses there and brought even more engineering talent there. So there's really just this like pressure cooker of spectacular technical talent and like infrastructure being built. And all these warehouses, by the way, they're like between 2,000 and 6,000 square feet. So like just perfect for an early stage deep tech company. Because if it's too big, you can't afford it. And then in the 2000s, SpaceX shows up, their first headquarters in El Segundo. That I think really made like the new innovative spirit palpable there. And what happened in about 2023 was two friends of mine, Zane Mountcastle and Cameron Schiller, respectively the CEOs and founders of PicoGrid and Rangeview. PicoGrid makes intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems, so like a tower that has a camera on it. Rangeview makes metal parts with a cool manufacturing method. They just did an evaluation of the whole country, said, okay, the technical talent is here, the price per square foot makes sense, we'll go to El Segundo. And then Cameron Schiller, he is one of the most tasteful men I know. I'm deciding between starting Rainmaker in Silicon Valley, in LA, in Arizona, or in Boulder for different reasons. I meet him and he was like, hey, I think that in order to reindustrialize the United States, in order to like make America a powerful nation that provides jobs that are meaningful for people that aren't just at their desk, in order to like push American political and geopolitical and strategic influence abroad, we need to make things. And in order to make things, we need to make it cool to make things because like, you know, if it's the social network, that's the tech movie, right? Like the Facebook movie, then kids are just going to go code, right? They're just going to go work on apps. If it's the Wolf of Wall Street, then they're just going to go do banking, right? You need to actually not just provide the financial incentive, but you need to make it sick and like culturally relevant to build something great. I think that you should come here for all these other reasons, but because Augustus, like you can help me make something great out of this. And then I moved and then I started running my mouth and then a whole bunch of other people moved. And
so it's really interesting to hear that this was all incredibly engineered and intentional. That was going to be my follow-up question of, did you just happen into this scenario in which you were creating companies alongside friends of yours and then this word of mouth grew? But it sounds like there was a concerted effort to make it cool and to have this hub of the Gundo.
Yeah, which like maybe makes us posers because it was deliberate, right? But like engineering has to be cool. And some of it's organic just because like not myself, but a lot of the other people are pretty sick there. But like, yeah, I think that we have to continue to like to break the fourth wall, right? Like we have to continue to socially engineer hardware to be interesting. But like, if we don't do it, then who and how, right? So
you mentioned Elon earlier, and Elon famously made the move to Texas. Does this mean that your love of the Gundo will keep you there, at least for the foreseeable future? Or do you see a world in which this hard tech movement eventually moves out of that area somewhere else in the US?
I'm a California maximalist. I love this state. I wasn't born here. I was born in Connecticut. I feel like maybe the Masters Green codes is Connecticut.
Oh, I see that for you.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It's funny. Gavin Newsom talked about this in that like silly debate between him and DeSantis, where he's like, yeah, more people are moving to California. Like, yeah, sure. The taxes are incredibly high. The state is on fire perpetually. Like there is homelessness in the cities and crime in the cities that doesn't exist in other places. But like, why do people keep moving here? Why does all the value in the country get generated in Silicon Valley and LA? There's something magic about it. And I mean, you could talk about like what really, okay, I'm going to get weird. You could talk about what really like the practical economic inputs are that facilitate it, the fact that it's beautiful, the fact that there's all this industrial latent infrastructure. There's a weird thing though. So there's an Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox Christian symbologist and like theologian, super, super strange, I know. And he made this observation that in old maps, so like in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, when people were super religious, at the edge of the east of the map, because the conventional understanding was, I'm sorry, this is so weird. In the conventional understanding was like the Garden of Eden, which the devil was in because like of the fall and eating from the tree and all, that was in the east. And in the west was Jerusalem, a New Jerusalem. And so in the east portion of the map, you'd see like lots of demons and stuff. But on the west, there'd be more angels. And we're in the city of angels, and we're at the west of the west coast of the United States, which is all the way over. So it might actually be that California's so special just because there's more angels here, like literally. Like it might just be a spiritually magical place. At least that's what I believe.
It's destiny. Great.
So no, I'm not going to Texas.
To circle back, yes, no Texas. So obviously, Rainmaker is having these incredibly lofty goals. You're building really hard to build technology, and that requires a lot of funding. So you raised $6 million in funding, I believe, last May.
We've announced $6 million of funding.
You've announced, okay, so an undisclosed amount potentially beyond that. How would you describe the fundraising process for you? Especially, it's necessary to raise a lot of capital to build what you're building with all the engineering and technology.
Yeah, I mean, the value prop, the journey that investors are on in a hard tech company, it like does not map at all for them relative to the software companies they traditionally invest in. Most any company. I think for most deep tech, it's like Rainmaker's in a unique position because we moved really fast, but most deep tech companies, it's like, yeah, maybe we'll have a product in 8 years. And yeah, that'll cost like $1 billion. Thank you very much. Please fund my Series E. I would say I met a lot of really valuable friends prior to fundraising for Rainmaker. I think that the extent to which Silicon Valley and tech in general runs on networks is observed but underappreciated. I think hadn't I known and been friends with Danielle Strackman and Michael Gibson from 1517, they participated in our pre-seed. If I hadn't known and been good friends with some other founders that introduced me to their investors, it would have been inordinately difficult to raise for this company. I think that if you are interested in tech, if you do want to get into tech, if you do want to start a company, you should spend at least 6 to 12 months socializing yourself in networks so that when you go out, it's not a pure cold start. Doing that helped us a lot. And then subsequently, I think deep tech and hard tech are kind of having a moment. I'm grateful for that. I think it's a good category to invest in, but I think it's definitely been easier in the last 2 years to raise for deep tech than it has been historically. But later this year, we're going to go out and we're going to raise some more money. So I'll check back in with you and let you know how it is.
Exciting.
5, yeah.
So I also saw that you were a Thiel Fellow. So can you tell our listeners the significance of this and really what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Peter Thiel, he was one of the co-founders of PayPal. He then founded, depending on who you ask, Founders Fund, which is one of the most prestigious and high return funds in tech. He's backed a lot of cool companies like Palantir, for example. He made the observation, I think in like the early 2000s, that the university system, one, that like the West was stagnating, and two, that the university system was facilitating that because people weren't spending as much time working on real technical things as much as they were kind of just getting this like 4-year like 6-figure adult daycare service out of college. And, candidly, like, although I enjoyed my physics classes, like I told you, I like did the college experience, which I'm not going to say that it's not fun. I'm not going to say that it's not formative, but like if we're talking about maturing people to become productive, to go out into the world, to make it great, to make like civilization better, he realized that the university system doesn't facilitate that, right? Like you spend 4 years and a lot of money just to like maybe go get an email job that you didn't need the degree for. Even with respect to a lot of engineering, if you just go and work as a technician and then like read some books on the side, you can become a relatively capable engineer on the job. And so what Peter decided to do was create a foundation that would fund 20 dropouts a year. If you drop out of college and decide to build something great and notable and evangelize on behalf of dropping out of college so that other people decide to, so that they do something productive instead of waste 4 years of their life, and candidly kind of like get indoctrinated. You'd give you $100,000. You could go off and start the company of your dreams. I'm one of the fellows from 2024. The network of fellows, I think, is at least some of the people that I've met in network are the most elite people that I've ever met. On balance, like of any group, I'm more impressed with Thiel Fellows than I am with Harvard alums. I'm more impressed with Thiel Fellows than I am of SpaceXers. This is kind of like talking my own book, right? But now what the fellowship aims to do is it aims to get people out of college into industry in the real world to build something great rather than wasting their time. And 1517, the fund that did our pre-seed, also has the same mission. Like they're trying to invest in kids that drop out of college too.
So how long were you at Berkeley before you left?
3 years. 3 years. I definitely.
I was going to say, were you a senior and then you had 1 semester left and then you left?
Yeah, there's a bit of stolen valor there because I was a senior when I dropped out. But dropped out nonetheless.
Yeah.
I've got some buddies that spent like a semester and then dropped out. That's a real one.
I'm curious. It sounds like just the fact that you were a Thiel Fellow and it's evangelizing, in your words, this mission that college isn't necessary in order to be a really productive worker and learn new skills. Is your advice to founders to just, if we're talking to an 18-year-old who has an idea for a company or even just wants to get into the workforce and eventually at some point build a company down the line, would your advice be to just not go to college at all?
I think that there's 2 kinds of people that definitely have to go to college, and then the rest should not. If you realize really early on in your life that you are a sensitive young man or young woman that reads lots of poetry and novels and novellas, and you want to be like a intellectual, then the appropriate place to do that is around other intellectuals at like an old school university system.
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. That's not available to most people. The second category is if you want to study like deep research, PhD level research. Maybe you should do that at a university. Most companies will actually facilitate it. But I think that those two categories of people are like 5% of the country. And I think the rest should not go to college. I think if you are 17 and submitting an application to university right now, just apply to the general application at Rainmaker instead. We'll make you an intern or give you some sort of job depending on your talent, or any other of the companies in Gunda will make use of you. That is what I would advise instead.
If you want a job and you're not going to college or you're dropping out early, hit Augustus up and we'll find a place for you. So you've mentioned that you have been running Rainmaker for 2 years now. What is an unconventional leadership philosophy that you've adopted as the company has grown over the past 2 years?
I'm gonna go public with this one for the first time. Ooh. It's been relatively discreet, I think, up until this point. We have one corporate value, which is, I think, very good for hiring because it filters well, because it sounds crazy, because it is a little crazy. It is, we love the taste of blood in our mouth. And so what does that mean, Augustus? That seems nuts. Have you heard Elon say building a company is like chewing glass and staring into the abyss?
Yes.
Okay, so sometimes true. Problem with it, though, that's just kind of a bummer, right? There's nothing really positive about that. It kind of just sucks. I don't want to chew glass. So that's not sufficient. Like my thinking, my realization was this company is going to be inordinately hard to build. Most companies are. Rainmaker maybe even uniquely so. Because like the market doesn't exist. Who are you going to sell rain to, you crazy person? Like you got to build your own drones. You ever heard of like K-band radar and like IQ mix? It's all ridiculous. So you will like get punched in the face. You don't just like have to get back up. I think the most productive disposition to have towards getting punched in the face by reality. And by the way, if you are getting punched in the face by reality, like if you're failing, if your drones are crashing, if your radar's bugging out, that means that like you're gathering information about how the world works. If you can Pavlov yourself, are you familiar? Yeah. Like if you can trick yourself into loving the sensation of failing such that you like are excited to get back up and attack the problem. Like if you can be like Rocky and actually fight harder because you're getting beat up more, you're going to create like a culture of really unparalleled work ethic and resilience. And so that I think is going to be for a long while our one corporate value. And I am grateful to say that like everybody at the company is pretty dialed in on it. For example, we have operations throughout the Western United States. So we're in California, Utah, Oregon, Colorado, Texas. And one time we were out in the middle of the night dumping snow. It was cold. Everyone is soaking wet. And one of our drones crashes like 2 miles away. And we don't have GPS on it. So we start driving the truck to go get it. Truck gets stuck in the mud. Can't dig the truck out because the shovels are in the other truck. Other truck doesn't know where we are. We're digging it. We're on our hands and knees digging this truck out of the mud. And like looking for the drone after that, walking through the fields, soaking wet, been up for 20 hours or something. And everyone is giddy in like the most miserable situation imaginable. Meaning like our GA guys, our government affairs guys that I forced to come out with us, our engineers, obviously, our scientists. That I think you can only do if you have a bit of a kooky corporate value. Like we love the taste of blood in our mouth.
To me, it sounds like it's almost the next evolution of the line that you referred to from Elon of chewing on glass, because obviously you're chewing on glass. You're going to get a bloody mouth. Mm-hmm. And so now it's, all right, we're taking that and we actually love the experience.
Yeah, exactly.
That is, I will say to date, that is the most unique corporate, whatever we want to call it, corporate motto or slogan.
Instead of integrity or something, right?
I'm just imagining in your office in Gundo, like you walk in, I believe you're in some kind of hangar, right?
Yeah.
At least that's what it looks like. First thing, it's like you just have that plastered across the
We
wall.
literally have a sign.
Oh, perfect. You already knew. Okay.
Does social currency have a value like that?
I'd say social currency at this point is a team of me, myself, and I. And I have a fabulous freelancer who helps with the newsletter. I will say, just point blank, we don't have anything that's as intense as that.
Yeah.
But the goal, I can share the North Star for us, is to build a platform that's sharing the most cutting edge and honest takes on entertainment and business. And so I love covering stories that are slightly controversial, are going to tell you what a company is doing wrong.
I saw the Enron.
Oh, the Enron egg. Yeah, exactly. So like, I want to talk about not just the success stories of business, but in fact, a lot of my growth has come from what happened when it all fell apart. You know, what I also call it is like the true crime of business. You know,
I was trying to define the genre to my chief of staff when I was talking about this, and that maps so well.
Yeah. It's like true crime for business.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
But I want to be positive too. So there's a balance, you know.
Cool.
I don't want to just be known as the girl who's taking down business. So these are the last 3 questions that I ask every guest. The first one, and I feel like you probably have a good few, and we've lightly touched on this, but I'm curious if you can share a system or framework that you personally use to help enhance your life. And that can be enhancing your organization and business. It can be something that you use for hiring, really anything that you personally use that benefits your life.
I'll give you like 2 small ones. One, to be really honest, is church and prayer. I think that if you are any kind of founder, I think if you're doing some sort of like high intensity work, it's really easy to get lost in like the things of this world and think about like, your own vainglory or status or money or ambition or power. And I'm super grateful that I have a relationship with God, just as like a grounding mechanism. That I think is important. And then I would say like much more practically, sort of to like the point of your question, there's something called, there's a system called Getting Things Done that I think was written by or developed by the guy that wrote Gmail. And if you go into Mochary, Mochary method.com, they have like a whole outline on how to do this. But basically you have your immediate to-dos, a category, like this is 4 spreadsheets, immediate to-dos, things that you're waiting on from other people, like maybe someday, and then the category of things that you want to bring up in subsequent meetings with people. So you can like block all of that out. Basically, if I have a task, just immediate instinct, toss it in there so that I always know what the next action is. And I can always not like lose, that maybe someday category. If you're a creative, then you always have like ideas about what you could possibly do. You don't want to lose all of those. So if you just dump them somewhere so that it doesn't distract from like what the next action actually has to be, but you can reference it and when you have free time, pick it up later. That system, Getting Things Done, or GTD, super useful. So
Okay.
would use that.
When you first said that the framework was getting things done, I just thought that was
just like doing it. I just do things. Yeah.
It's Nike. You just do it.
Yeah. I work actually. Yeah.
Okay. So the very last question comes from the social currency corner, where I get your input on a trend or story that's impacting business and culture. Now, in this case, I was really thinking about what I could ask you given your industry domain expertise. And for this one, it's a little bit different. But obviously, we're in Los Angeles right now. I want to talk about the LA fires. And everyone probably knows about this, but they ravaged through the city of LA. Is there a world in which advanced cloud seeding technology, like what Rainmaker is building, could someday play a role in going into one of those fire areas and making the damage ultimately less extreme?
I don't think there's like a world where that happens. I think this is the world where that happens. I think it's in the not too distant future. Like I think that severe weather and disasters, like I said, drought and hurricanes, wildfire also constitutes one of those. Rainmaker ultimately wants to make Earth habitable, which means we have to get rid of things like that. And so what Rainmaker plans to do for that, and I wish that we were able to do this earlier on. It was extraordinarily sad seeing the fires. A lot of friends in the Palisades lost places. What Rainmaker will do someday soon is the following. We can't make clouds out of thin air, but we can make existing clouds precipitate. What preceded the fires was months of no precipitation. The most important thing that we can do is wildfire prevention by increasing the soil moisture and the moisture of vegetation, by keeping precipitation coming in all of these areas that traditionally have wildfire risk because they get too dry. If we, as the city of LA or as the state of California, do targeted precipitation enhancement over areas with wildfire risk, we can radically reduce the risk of wildfires in the future. And I think that that's the most important thing to do. And then also inducing precipitation over fires that are actively going on. One, oftentimes there's no clouds with enough moisture if there are fires underway. Like a lot of the big poofy clouds you see that come from smoke, they're just really hot, really dry. So that's a non-starter. But if there are other moister clouds that roll in, maybe it's viable. You have to be very cautious about where you induce precipitation because there's burn tracks. You don't want to cause flooding. So all of our operations have suspension criteria there, but it's something that we're investigating. At the very least, wildfire prevention through precipitation enhancement earlier in the season. Like that is a must. And we're talking to the state of California about making that happen right now.
Okay. Let's get you a government contract for all of California so we can stop these fires.
That's the idea.
Augustus, thank you for this conversation.
Thanks so much for having me, Sammi.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. I've been wanting to launch this show for so long. I can't tell you how excited I am to do this and how thrilled I am that you're actually here listening. It means the world to me. If you liked what you heard today, please rate and review the podcast because it massively helps to support the work I do to bring the show to life. And if you want to keep up with the hottest business lore in real time, follow me on Instagram at Sammi Cohen Talks and subscribe to my newsletter, Social Currency, which is linked in the show notes. Social Currency is a production of Social Currency Media and Money News Network. The podcast is hosted and executive produced by me, Sammi Cohen. Social Currency is produced by the Money News Network team. See you next time.